It's an untold story that I think about quite a bit, actually, when I see the stories that we tell you and report on about young men committing horrific crimes, shootings across the country, even, into the early 40s, this age group probably from like 21 to 44, and whether or not there is a connection between the anxiety and loneliness and gaming and pot nexus that may be driving some of what we're seeing. Because I know if you're like me, you feel that covering a story about a mass shooting every few days doesn't make any sense. There's something going on out there. And the more we peel back the layers and try to get under who these lost young men are in America and get to the heart of it, it's going to keep going and going and going, is my estimation, based on the intensity of these stories that we've covered a lot. So it really caught my eye today when one of our finest reporters, Alexis McAdams, was taking on this story, the link between the rise in marijuana use and big problems for America's adolescents in 2025. So, Alexis, thank you so much for joining us today. You do such a great job covering your beat and crime stories and anti-Semitism at Columbia and the Butler story in Pennsylvania. So you're one of our best young reporters, and it's great to have you on today. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So this is the story that you're digging in today. Tell us what you've learned.
Well, so I think what you mentioned, when you talk about all these horrible things that have happened, we're talking about all these different shootings across the country, and you start to peel back the layers, you kind of, according to some researchers, they might find a possible link, because we're talking about extreme amounts of marijuana use with some of these recent gunmen. So you look at what happened in Minneapolis just the other week. I mean, that was only back in August. It's like the time flies. You think about what happened at that
the
horrible, the Catholic church. These little kids are in there. The transgender gunman opens fire, and then, everyone wants to know, well, what happened? What went wrong, right? And so you dig into these people's past, and there was something specifically that stuck out to investigators. It was that Robin Westman said, in his own words, that gender, because he had transitioned, and weed really effed up his head. So he said it himself, and he said he had started using. He worked at a marijuana shop in Minneapolis up until just a few weeks before police say he opened fire. So I think that's why investigators now, with all this recent violence, are looking at how does the brain, how is it impacted negatively by using marijuana? And it impacts, the part of the brain that's also, when they look at dementia and memory and things like that, it's the same area, and the motivation. And so we talk about how people, that smoke all that pot all the time, they don't go out, they don't talk to people, and they do use those video games. So that's kind of the link that we were looking into. And researchers, as we were saying, mentioned that, marijuana now is a lot different than what it used to be. Like in the 90s, the early 2000s, it's a lot stronger.
Yeah, it's a great point. And obviously you have to look at the different circumstances with these shooters. Mm-hmm. And, you can go back, I think, to Sandy Hook, to some of these other instances. And I think it's a question that investigators ask, what drugs was this person using? And they try to look into whether or not there is a larger problem going on here. And we also, obviously, this overlays with the legalization of pot across the country. Now, I think a lot of people, like you said, just sort of look at this as like, it's not that big a deal. It's just pot. If someone smokes a joint at a party, whatever, it's a free country. That's part of the philosophy. I think there's two different areas towards the legalization of pot. That's the legalization of recreational pot. And then you have the medicinal movement, which I think there is a lot of merit to in terms of relief for cancer patients. I don't think anybody takes issue with that. Helpful for senior citizens, the elderly in many ways when they're undergoing treatment and pain issues. That is not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is this chronic use, chronic daily use, when it's combined with isolation, loneliness, gaming, an excessive addiction to gaming, I would say, and the overlap that crops up here.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at some of these shooters and just the recent things, we talk about Utah, going back to what happened with the Charlie Kirk shooting, just gaming there specifically. The governor of Utah, Governor Cox, had said, go outside, touch grass, what's going on? Because that gunman, according to police, had logged thousands of hours, video gaming alone. And then when you tie in some of the other cases, the marijuana use, they don't go outside, they self-isolate. And like doctors have said, it really impacts the brain and the brain patterns. And just going back to, how concentrated this stuff is, because living in New York, we walk around here. One, you can smell it everywhere, all over the streets.
Everywhere.
Yeah, and two, you can see the pot shops pop up pretty much on every block. And so it's accessible and it's marketable when you say, now dispensary flower strains are at 30% THC for a concentrate, and a wax or a vape that you see people walking around with and, vaping all over is like 90% THC. So that's a lot different than, sharing, like you said, when people, pots, maybe, other people, it's not like parents say, go smoke pot, at the party. Nobody wants any kids or anything using drugs in the first place, but it's a lot different to be at a party and somebody, takes a hit of marijuana there compared to now walking around and constantly vaping something that's 90% THC. That's not even pot anymore. It's completely different.
That's right. And they also sell bumps. So you can bump the THC on whatever you buy to make the concentration even higher. So the question is, what did you learn about studies that are being done on this? And, we've also talked on the story about this vomiting disease that is also a big part of kids who smoke a lot of pot. And I'm talking about a child who, is almost daily smoking pot, and the impact that it has on their health. And it does line up with this legalization issue, because these companies and these shops, they want to make money, and they make more money if they can get someone addicted to this stuff.
Yeah, and they flavor it and they put all these different names in it. And so, people get excited and they want to try the latest trend or whatever in these vape pens for pot. But studies that we were looking at, Martha, show that young men who use marijuana constantly, like we said, they don't go out of the house. They continuously vape when they're walking to work, if they go, while they're on the couch playing video games. They have the highest risk of getting schizophrenia, and that's according to the National Institute of Health. And so that's why these doctors are looking at that. Like, how does the brain and how is it impacted, and what choices do people make? And they think because of the pattern it has on the brain that they do self-isolate on their own. So then people kind of start having that psychosis, or they don't want to go around their friends, they don't want to go around their family, and they stay inside. And when you're playing a video game all the time that's pretty violent, the reality kind of blends together. You don't know what your reality is. So it is interesting how all these different parts kind of have a nexus there, and it is possibly linked to this recent violence.
So Joshua John, the Dallas ICE shooter who you mentioned, Alexis, was reportedly a big gamer, logged thousands of hours playing mostly first-person shooter games.
Yeah, 10,000 hours.
Exactly. And I believe we saw that in the Charlie Kirk case as well, that Tyler Robinson, the suspect in that case, logged nearly 5,000 hours in the weeks before gameplay. So that basically means you're not doing anything else.
No.
Right? And you heard his friends say, well, I used to know him, but he kind of disappeared. And the same thing about this guy, Joshua John. The people who knew him, the people who they found, when you're reporting on this story, you're going to say, oh, well, let me find someone who knew him. Everyone they found said, well, I haven't talked to him in a few years.
Yeah. It used to be normal. It's like you can almost write it like you talk to these people in all these different criminal cases, especially with these ones. Oh, yeah, I used to see him. He was friendly in class. He was in athletics. I don't know what happened to him. He got kind of weird. He was a big pothead. And so it is. It's like you start thinking, as you've covered all these big stories and these horrible tragedies, you track it, like something connects. And when they are sitting inside all the time, they're talking on Discord. Like we've done so many stories where Discord ends up being a part of these tragedies too. It's their chat. They're all chatting on there with the same people who don't go outside either, who possibly are using marijuana and only want to talk to people on a video game headset. So,
and we talked about these memes, and it all, you can see how it all fits together. They're, sort of this, edgy, cynical humor, right? That he was deep into, Tyler Robinson, and we saw some of it in what was etched on
the gaming, memes, and if you see this, all these weird. I didn't even realize what that meant.
It's like unraveling a language, and we did unravel the language, and you find out, where people are using phrases like this, what it means. There's an Antifa link to Bella Bella Ciao, for example. And it's like these individuals, the thing that I think is so really scary, I think, for parents about Tyler Robinson's case, the suspect in the Kirk assassination, is that he really seemed to sort of have a double life because he was in touch with his parents. He said, oh, my dad's going to be really mad if I don't get the gun back. It's my grandfather's gun, according to the investigation there. He seemed to still be somewhat tethered to family. They talked about, oh, he brought this stuff up at a recent family gathering. And that, I think, is really terrifying for parents.
Yeah.
Because it's just this rabbit hole that is so dark. Parents have to figure out how to know when your child is headed in this direction.
Well, and like, there are a lot of kids, you say go to in sports. I mean, I never really came home after school, and I know your kids are active and played sports even in college, but my mom's always like, go, like you're not going to come home and sit here
outside.
And you're not going to sit on the phone or on the internet. And I didn't play video games, but if I did, she would have been like, that's enough of like Call of Duty, go out in the backyard. So I think it's like your reality, at least according to these doctors too. They say like their reality, they have two different realities. They might act a certain way at the dinner table with you, and then they get on this gaming headset and they're talking to a whole world of people that might believe these kind of crazy things too. And so it becomes kind of more normalized because you find this community on either the dark web or the internet or gaming platforms that are talking about these things, and then some people act on it.
It's so true. And I go back to the legalization of marijuana because obviously it's made it a lot easier for people to get their hands on it. And then, as we've said several times, it's also really ramped up the THC levels. And in the reporting that you did today, it says daily use of high THC potency cannabis strongly linked to psychosis. In studies of daily use, it showed that it was associated with a 3 to 5 times higher risk of first episode psychosis versus people who never use high THC, high potency cannabis. So you're increasing your chances of having a first episode of psychosis dramatically if you start using this pot, which is accessible, it's legal in most places across the country. The problem is you have, at the highest levels, you have had a lobbying effort that has pushed legalization of marijuana all across the country. And it's sort of a broad stroke argument. Oh, well, it's good for medical purposes. Some people find it really helps their pain and cancer treatments. And it can be good for the elderly. The White House has said this. But I think that they're also at the same time trying to figure out what's going on with all these young men. So you have to, I think, open our eyes to the possibility that these things are connected and crack down on who has accessibility to legal pot. You can't be 17 years old and walk in and buy, a case of beer. There's a reason for that.
That's right. And some of the doctors were saying, too, people already might have, like, by the time you're 17 years old to 24 or 25, they were mentioning sometimes then, with your genetics and things like that, you might already have, like, a little bit of psychosis or people develop mental illnesses around that time. So if you're, vaping marijuana at 90%, that just accelerates it. And so it's not even something that's in your genetics that you were going to have an issue mental health-wise. It's just that you're causing it because you're, really deteriorating your brain. But I do think, going back to people I just talked to, friends and people that I grew up with, everybody always says it's no big deal. It's just a little pot. Well, that's not the case anymore, if it ever was.
It clearly is not the case anymore. And I think that, I've heard some who've studied this topic say that the legalization of pot might have been one of the biggest mistakes in American history because of what it is doing to so many young men out there. And I've just always put an asterisk next to it. If your doctor's prescribing it for cancer treatment, this is a different situation. I just would also mention that we have teachers here in New York City who say that the grade school kids cannot concentrate because they're eating gummies, because they get access to gummies from big brothers and sisters, like, a big brother or sister when I was growing up might, get people a 6-pack of beer, younger kids to, let them have some fun with on the weekend. So this is now transformed into, here's a bag of gummies, if you want to take some before school, go ahead. And they're in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. So it is an issue that I think we are learning more about in a really, really dark, scary way. And I encourage everybody to watch Alexis's piece on this. Dig into it yourself, too. And I would just say this to parents. If you have a child who you think is spending too much time gaming, if a couple of these different things that we're talking about crop up in your mind and you say, yeah, I know somebody who does one of those things or one or two of those things or 2 or 3 of those things, become very isolated recently, you really have to have some kind of intervention and confrontation.
What would you say to do?
Person.
Like, I guess, what would you, as a mom, what would you tell people?
I think you have to do an intervention. I think you have to sit that person down and say, we're going to get outside. We're not going to be gaming anymore. I honestly, as a parent, I didn't even let my kid. We didn't have any gaming systems in our house ever
because it
just never felt good to me to have them in the basement in the dark, shooting at people on a Game Boy, even on the little thing. It just didn't feel. My gut was like, this doesn't feel like a healthy activity. And if they went to a friend's house and they played on their game system for a couple, fine, no big deal. I don't want to be, I think if you are too militant about something, it just makes that thing much more enticing. But not at home. And so, I think we all, nobody's a perfect parent. I certainly am not. But we all have to open our eyes because you're love kids who may be going down this road, and we really need to be really aware of it. So, Alexis, thank you for your reporting on this.
Thank you for having me.
It's a really important story. And thank you for joining me for the Untold Story podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Alexis McAdams joining me here in New York today. That is the Untold Story. We'll see you next time.